Welcome to the Isle of Man Government Sanctions and Export Control web pages. This short presentation will explore how Sanctions works and how to make the best of our website resources. Whether you are new to Sanctions or have a good working knowledge, this guide will help you to understand the basics and how to stay compliant. Let me start by introducing who we are. The Customs and Immigration Division, as part of the Treasury Department of the Isle of Man Government, is the main authority responsible for sanctions and export control on the Isle of Man. Our role is to implement sanctions legislation, publish updates and relevant guidance in relation to regimes, raise awareness of sanctions through outreach and training, consider sanctions license applications and enforce sanctions in the island. We work in partnership with other government agencies to ensure that sanctions laws are followed as part of our wider vision to strengthen communications and facilitate cooperation between government, regulators and industry in order to combat the threats of the Isle of Man's financial systems by persons attempting to commit financial crimes. The Financial Intelligence Unit, FIU for short, receives sanctions reports via their Themis system. The reports are split into two types. A report of frozen assets that have been identified by a business, or a report of a suspicion of a financial sanctions breach. These reports are reviewed and developed by the FIU and then disseminated to the relevant authorities. The FIU also develops typologies for industry. The Financial Services Authority, FSA for short, is the regulator for the island's financial services businesses. The FSA ensures that regulated businesses are compliant with the AML-CFT code. That code requires regulated business to comply with sanctions and will conduct supervisory inspections to test whether businesses have suitable policies and procedures in place. Where breaches of the AML-CFT code are identified, the FSA will take enforcement action, which can include imposing civil penalties and revocation of licenses. The Gambling Supervision Commission, GSC for short, are the regulator for island gambling business and conduct similar supervision and enforcement as the FSA. Gambling businesses are subject to the Gambling AML-CFT code. The Isle of Man Constabulary, through its proactive International Money Laundering Investigation Team, or PIMLIT for short, investigate the more serious sanctions breaches which are considered for criminal prosecution. PIMLIT also investigate money laundering and terrorist financing offences. The Attorney General's Chambers provide the agencies with legal advice and are the prosecutor for the Isle of Man in criminal court cases. Sanctions are prohibitions and restrictions on services and trade, which are put in place by governments or organisations like the United Nations, with the aim of maintaining or restoring international peace and security by targeting countries, organisations, businesses or individuals. These measures are designed to change behaviours and apply pressure by denying access to key resources that would allow them to continue these activities, including the financing of terrorism or nuclear proliferation. It can also be used as a political tool to show disapproval and denounce certain actions or protect assets that have been misappropriated from a country until they can be repatriated. The Isle of Man implements all sanctions imposed by the United Nations and the United Kingdom. There are a range of sanction measures that can be imposed, with the most frequently used tool being financial sanctions. Financial sanctions include freezing assets to prevent access to funds or being able to make financial transactions. Examples of this are frozen bank accounts that are blocked to stop withdrawals, or a company might be barred from paying for goods supplied by a sanctioned company. The term assets also includes economic resources such as land and property, which could be used to obtain funds, goods or services. Financial services, as well as freezing assets that already exist, there are also prohibitions from providing services such as investments or loans. The primary aim of financial sanctions is to disrupt the flow of funds that may support illicit activities such as terrorism, human rights abuses, or the proliferation of weapons. These measures can have significant consequences, and robust systems need to be in place to identify and avoid dealings with sanctions entities or individuals. Trade sanctions are restrictions on the import or export of specified goods, services, or technologies. They can also apply to services like shipping or insurance. Some examples can be in the form of embargoes, which are complete bans on trade with a country. Export controls restrict the export of dual-use technologies or military goods. Dual-use technologies are items that can be used for both civilian or military purposes. Sector sanctions target specific sectors of industry, such as energy or high-value goods. Transport sanctions relate to restrictions on movement of ships and aircraft. This includes bans on entry to ports and airports. This type of sanction also restricts the registration of ships and aircraft on the relevant registers. Travel sanctions prevent individuals from travelling to or through specific countries. Someone subject to a travel ban may be denied a visa or entry on arrival. This is used to control movement of individuals who pose a security threat or are involved in acts violating international law. A regime refers to the specific set of sanctions imposed on a country or a group of countries. The guidance area of the website splits regimes into two areas: geographic and thematic. Of the geographic sanctions, the highest profile regime is currently Russia. But there are also long-standing regimes including Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or more commonly known as North Korea. The thematic sanctions regimes include chemical weapons, counterterrorism, cyber, unauthorized drilling, global anti-corruption and global human rights. Each regime has its own guidelines and restrictions. It is the policy of the Isle of Man government to maintain the implementation of international sanctions in line with the sanction measures that have effect in the United Kingdom. Sanctions imposed by the United Nations Security Council also apply in the Isle of Man due to the United Kingdom's membership of the United Nations and the obligations internationally to prevent terrorist financing and the development of nuclear weapons. Financial, trade, transport and immigration sanctions are implemented in the United Kingdom by the regulations under the Sanctions and Anti-Money Laundering Act 2018. Sanctions are given legal effect in the Isle of Man through the Sanctions Act 2024 and the Terrorism and Other Crime Financial Restrictions Act 2014. The background as to how we reach this position is as follows. The United Nations Act 1946. Sanctions legislation was extended to the Isle of Man under this UK Act. The Act gives legal effect to the United Nations Security Council decisions, such as sanctions. The European Communities Act 1973. When the UK joined the EU adopted the EU regulations in relation to sanctions. The Isle of Man also adopted the EU regulations using this Act. The Terrorism and Other Crime Financial Restrictions Act 2014. This Act introduced the ability for the Isle of Man to impose its own sanctions designations in relation to terrorism. It also gave legal effect to certain UN Security Council resolutions relating to terrorism and proliferation financing. The European Union and Trade Act 2019. When the UK left the EU and introduced the Sanctions and Anti-Money Laundering Act 2018, the island again followed suit and gave effect to all the UK sanctions regimes using this Act. This was a temporary measure and was replaced last year by the Sanctions Act 2024. The Sanctions Act is the main act which gives legal effect to UN and UK sanctions measures. Detailed information and guidance on obligations for businesses can be found on the Isle of Man Financial Services Authority website. The website also has a series of webinars that cover various topics to raise awareness of compliance, risk management, and regulatory requirements, and are designed to help you understand and implement effective measures in your workplace. Some key points you will need to consider include risk assessments. Ensure sanctions risks are included in your organisation's risk assessments. Trade in goods and services. Verify the legitimacy of goods, their destination and customers. Financial transactions. Screen individuals against the UK sanctions list and conduct due diligence checks. Sanctions procedures. Review and update your sanctions procedures and ensure staff are trained on sanctions regimes. Reporting and registers. Establish reporting procedures for sanctions, money laundering, terrorist financing and proliferation financing. Maintain registers of disclosures and inquiries. Staff training. Provide annual training on sanctions, money laundering, terrorist financing and proliferation financing. Ensure staff understand proliferation financing activities and sanctions regimes. Gap analysis. Review reports and national risk assessments from regulators. Conduct gap analyses and improve compliance. Horizon scanning. Monitor global and local developments in related typologies. Now we have covered how sanctions works on the Isle of Man and what some of the obligatory requirements are. Let's do a quick knowledge check with a couple of quiz questions. Which of the following best describes the purpose of international sanctions? A. To promote tourism and trade between countries. B. To punish individuals for tax evasion. C. To influence behaviour and restrict activities of targeted individuals, entities or countries. D. To regulate domestic employment laws. I will give you a few moments to reflect on the possible answer. The answer is of course C. To influence behaviour and restrict activities of targeted individuals, entities or countries. Our next question. Which of the following is a key obligation for businesses in the Isle of Man under sanctions regulations? A. Reporting all customers' transactions to the Treasury. B. Ignoring UK sanctions unless explicitly notified. C. Only applying sanctions to non-EU countries. D. Screening clients and transactions against sanctions lists and reporting matches. I will give you a few moments to reflect on the possible answer. The answer is of course D. Screening clients and transactions against sanctions lists and reporting matches. And now for the website overview. Our website is a one-stop resource for sanctions-related information. It's designed to help you find guidance, stay up to date with changes, and access the tools you need to remain compliant. If you are unclear about any aspects of sanctions law, in particular about whether an action you are considering taking could contravene the law, you are advised to seek independent legal advice. To navigate around the website, there are options to use the search bar to quickly find specific topics. The homepage features quick links to the key areas like guidance, licenses and updates. If you are unsure where to find what you need, please contact our team via email at sanctions@gov.im or by phone on 648 109. The website offers key features including export and trade controls. This area contains notices and guidance relating to the export of cultural goods. These are items of cultural interest to the Isle of Man, such as archaeological or national significant objects. Firearms and other weapons. This relates to export and import controls. And strategic export and trade controls. These relate to items such as diamonds, radioactive substances, military goods, services and technology, items that can be used for both civil and military purposes, goods that can be used for torture or capital punishment, firearms, ammunition and related equipment. Guidance. This area has practical advice to help you understand sanctions. There are General Financial Sanctions Guide that relates to all sanctions, a Compliance Guide, a Monetary Penalties and Enforcement Guide, as well as a Ransomware Guide. There are also 35 guidance documents relating to specific geographic or thematic regimes. These should be read alongside the more general guides to support your understanding of sanctions. Legislation. This area provides information and links to the legislation that gives effect to sanctions on the Isle of Man. Licensing. This area provides information on what sanctions licenses are and the types that are available. There is a guide document that goes through all the relevant areas relating to the application process. There are also external links to further guides, the application form, and a list of general licenses that apply to the Isle of Man. Reporting. How you make a report depends on the type of sanctions measures you think have been breached. Reporting of financial sanctions must be directed to the Financial Intelligence Unit, and more information can be found on this page on how to do this. Reporting of trade and transport sanctions needs to be directed to the Treasury, with further details provided on this page. Sanctions relating to proliferation financing. There are a number of sanctions regimes that relate to proliferation and proliferation financing. This page provides information and guidance on potential risks, making reports, and how to comply. Sanctions relating to terrorism and terrorist financing. Similar to the information on the previously mentioned page, there are a number of sanctions regimes that relate to terrorism and terrorist financing. This page provides information and guidance on potential risks, making reports, and how to comply. Related news. This is where regular alerts are created to keep you informed of any changes to guidance, designations, legislation, and amendments to the website that are made. Please look at our Sanctions Compliance Guide, which gives you a top 10 tips for ensuring compliance with sanctions regulations. Each tip is designed to help organisations effectively manage and adhere to sanctions requirements. The most important takeaways from the guide are as follows. Do your due diligence. Research individuals and businesses you deal with. Report suspicious activity. Use the reporting tools on our website. Stay informed. Regular training and awareness are key. Get expert advice. If in doubt, consult a legal professional. Case study. A business is considering entering into a contract with a foreign company. Through due diligence, the business discovers that the company is linked to a sanctioned entity. What steps should the business take to ensure compliance with the Isle of Man sanctions? Pause and investigate. Gather all relevant details. Consult the sanctions list. Check if the entity and or the owner or controllers of the entity is listed. 3. Seek legal advice. This ensures the correct steps are taken. 4. Report findings. Inform the relevant authorities if you have declined the business on suspicions. This approach ensures compliance while protecting the business. To wrap up, here are the key takeaways. Sanctions are legal prohibitions and restrictions imposed to maintain international peace, security, and the rule of law. The Isle of Man adheres to international sanctions and imposes its own based on UK regulations. The Isle of Man Sanctions website is a key resource for checking sanctions lists, understanding compliance obligations, and accessing legislative text. Regular due diligence and reporting obligations are essential for maintaining compliance. Stay updated through the news section of the website to keep pace with any changes in sanctions. Thank you for your time. We are happy to provide outreach to industry relating to sanctions and to point you in the right direction for finding relevant information or guidance.